The outer veil was a quiet place. It was a wide stretch of dark space at the edge of the Vorith Dominion, far from the bright core worlds and far from any real danger. Nothing important ever happened there. That was why pilot Doran Vale liked his patrol route. He flew a small scout ship through the same empty stars every week, checked a few old sensor buoys, and went home. It was a boring job, but boring jobs were safe jobs, and Doran liked being safe. The Vorith Dominion was a large and powerful empire. It ruled over 12 different worlds and many smaller colonies. Its fleets were strong, its weapons were advanced, and its leaders were proud. For 300 years, no enemy had dared to challenge it inside its own borders. The Dominion had grown used to winning. It had grown used to being the strongest power in this part of the galaxy. On that day, Doran's scout ship passed near a small, cold star with no name, only a number. His sensors picked up something strange. At first he thought it was a sensor error. He tapped the screen twice, the way he always did when the numbers looked wrong. The shape did not disappear. There was a ship sitting alone in the dark, near the edge of the star's weak light. It was huge, far bigger than any scout vessel, even bigger than most Vorith warships. It was not moving. It gave off almost no heat and almost no power. If Doran had not flown directly toward it, he might have missed it completely. He slowed his ship and looked closer. The hull of the strange vessel was dark gray, almost black, with no markings he recognized. It had no flags, no symbols, nothing that matched any species or empire in the Dominion's records. He ran the shape through his ship's database. Nothing matched, not even close. Doran felt his hands grow cold on the controls. He had heard stories about ghost ships from the old wars, dead vessels left drifting for centuries. But those stories were just stories, things told to scare young pilots. This ship did not look dead. It looked like it was waiting. He sent a message back to his command station, keeping his voice steady even though his hearts were beating fast. This is Scout Vale. I have found an unknown vessel near outpost marker 721. It does not match any ship in our records. Requesting instructions. 2. The answer did not come quickly. Messages had to travel a long way before reaching the nearest fleet command. Doran waited, watching the silent ship through his window, feeling smaller with every passing minute. He did not try to get closer. Something about the stillness of the great dark ship told him that getting closer would not be wise. Many hours later, a response finally arrived. He was ordered to keep his distance, take more readings, and wait for a proper fleet to arrive. Doran breathed out in relief. He was happy to let someone else deal with this. Word of the discovery moved quickly up through the ranks of the Dominion's military. By the next day, it had reached Fleet Admiral Korath Des, one of the most experienced commanders in the entire Navy. Korath had fought in 3 border conflicts and had helped bring 2 smaller species under Dominion control. He was not a man who was easily surprised. But when he looked at the readings sent by the young scout pilot, even he felt a small chill run through him. No power signature matches our database, he said to his second officer reading from the report. No design matches our database. No language on the hull matches anything we have ever seen, traded with, or fought against. Could it be a relic? His second officer asked. Something left over from an older war? Perhaps from one of the empires that no longer exist? Korath considered this. There had been many wars in the galaxy long before the Vorith Dominion rose to power. Some empires had vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but broken planets and old legends. It was possible this ship was simply an old wreck, a leftover piece of forgotten history. But there was one detail in the report that troubled him the most. The ship was not broken. There was no damage on its hull. There were no signs of battle, no signs of decay. It looked whole, strong, and ready, even though it gave off almost no power. A true relic would show its age. This ship showed nothing at all. Korath brought the matter to the ruling council of the Dominion, a group of senior leaders who decided the Empire's most important matters. The council met in a tall building on the capital world, in a room with a wide window that looked out over the city below. The leader of the council was Councillor Yenra Thal, a clever and careful woman who had guided the Dominion through many difficult decisions. Admiral Korath believes this ship may be connected to an old legend, one of the other councillors said, looking nervous. The legend of the species called humans. A quiet murmur passed through the room. Most of the councillors had heard the name before, usually as a story told to frighten children, or as a strange footnote buried in old historical records. Long ago, before the Vorith Dominion existed, there had been a war fought between several ancient empires and a species known only as humans. The war was called the Ember War by the few records that survived. It was said to have been the most destructive conflict the galaxy had ever known. And then, suddenly, the humans vanished. No one knew why. Some records claimed they had been wiped out completely. Other records, written in fear rather than fact, claimed they had simply chosen to disappear, retreating somewhere beyond the known stars, waiting. That is an old story, Counselor Yenra said calmly. A story, nothing more. We do not build policy on legends. Then explain the ship, the nervous counselor replied. Explain why nothing in our records matches it. Explain why it shows no damage, after sitting still for who knows how long. Yenra looked toward Admiral Korath. What do you suggest, Admiral? Korath had already thought carefully about this. I suggest we treat it as an unknown threat, until proven otherwise. We send a fleet, not to attack without reason, but to investigate properly. If it truly is an old relic with no power left, we study it and bring its technology home. If it is something else, something active, we need to know quickly, before it becomes a real problem. The council debated for a long while. Some wanted to destroy the ship immediately, just to be safe. Others wanted to ignore it completely, fearing that any contact might wake something better left asleep. In the end, the decision came down to a simple truth. The Dominion was proud, and pride did not like leaving questions unanswered. They decided to send a fleet, both to investigate and, if necessary, to take control of whatever advanced technology the ship might hold. An old relic from a forgotten war, sitting unguarded in space, was exactly the kind of prize that could give the Dominion an advantage over its rivals. The task of leading this fleet was given to Captain Vasquedren, a younger officer known for his sharp tongue and his fast rise through the ranks. Vask had won several smaller battles against pirate groups and rebel colonies, and he was eager for a chance to prove himself on a larger stage. When he was told about the mysterious ship, he did not feel fear. He felt excitement. One ship, he said to his crew, standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Pride, sitting alone, with no power, no movement, no defense fleet around it. Whatever this thing is, it will not be difficult to deal with. His second officer, an older woman named Senna Brask, was less certain. She had read the old legends as a child, the way many on the capital world had, and something about this situation made her uneasy. Captain, the records say the Ember War nearly destroyed several empires before the humans disappeared. If there is even a small chance that is exactly why this is a story for children, Senna, Vask interrupted, waving a hand. If this species was so powerful, why would they vanish at all? Why would they not simply rule the galaxy by now? No, this ship is old, broken, and forgotten, just like the empires that built it. We will take it, study it, and bring honor to the Dominion. Senna said nothing more, but she did not feel reassured. The fleet that gathered to make the journey was not small. It included 12 warships of different sizes, supported by smaller scout and support vessels. By the standards of the Vorith Dominion, it was more than enough force to deal with almost any threat they had faced in living memory. The ships were armed with powerful energy weapons, strong shields, and fast engines. Their crews were well-trained, confident, and used to victory. As the fleet prepared to leave the capital world, Admiral Korath stood at the edge of the launch platform, watching the great ships rise into the sky one by one. He had wanted to lead the mission himself, but the council had decided his experience was better used, managing the wider response from the capital, in case anything unexpected happened. Watching the ships depart, he felt a strange unease he could not fully explain. He turned to a young officer standing beside him. Send a message to Captain Vask. Tell him to proceed with caution. Tell him that pride has ended many great campaigns before they truly began. The young officer nodded and went to send the message. Whether Vask would listen to it was another matter entirely. The journey to the edge of the outer veil took several days. During that time, scientists back on the capital world studied every scrap of data sent by Doran Vale's scout ship. They measured the size of the unknown vessel, the strange angles of its hull, the faint patterns of energy hidden deep inside it. None of it matched anything in their long history of exploration and conquest. The more they studied, the more questions they had, and fewer answers came. One scientist, an old researcher named Ket Averin, spent 3 days going through ancient texts about the Ember War. Texts so old that most people had forgotten they existed. He found fragments of descriptions written by frightened survivors from empires long dead. They spoke of ships that did not fight like other ships. They spoke of battles that ended faster than anyone expected, with entire fleets destroyed before they could even understand what was happening to them. Ket read these fragments many times, trying to decide if they were exaggerated stories or honest memories. He could not be sure. No proof remained except old words and the silence that followed them. He brought his findings to the council, hoping someone would take the warning seriously. Counselor Yenra read his report carefully, her face calm, but her eyes thoughtful. "These are very old words, Researcher Ket," she said. "Written by frightened people, long after the events they describe. We cannot build a policy of fear on stories like these." "I am not asking you to fear them, Counselor," Ket replied. "I am asking you to be careful. There is a difference." Yenra nodded slowly. "The fleet has already been sent. We will know more soon enough." As the fleet drew closer to the unnamed star where the strange ship waited, Captain Vask grew more confident with every passing hour. He studied the scout's old readings again and again, looking for any sign of danger, and finding none. The ship gave off no weapons activity. It gave off no shields. It simply sat there, dark and still, like a sleeping giant that had been forgotten by time. "We will surround it," Vask told his officers, drawing lines on the holographic map above the command table. "We will attempt communication first, as protocol requires. If there is no response, and there likely will not be, we will move to secure the vessel. If it shows any sign of resistance, we destroy it before it can become a threat. Simple, clean, and quick." Senebrask looked at the dark shape on the map for a long moment before speaking. "And if the legends are true, Captain, what then?" Vask smiled, the confident smile of a man who had never truly lost. "Then we will be the ones who finally write the true ending to an old story." The fleet pushed onward through the dark, 12 proud warships moving steadily toward a single silent vessel that had not moved, had not spoken, and had not shown any sign of fear since the moment it was found. Somewhere far behind them, on the capital world, Admiral Korath stood by a window, watching the stars, hoping his warning had been heard, and fearing that it had not. Ahead of the fleet, in the cold dark near the nameless star, the great ship continued to wait. It gave no sign of concern. It gave no sign of anything at all. It simply waited, the way it always had, for whatever came next. The 12 warships of the Vorith Dominion arrived at the edge of the nameless star system 3 days after leaving the capital world. Captain Vaskidron stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's pride, watching the dark shape of the unknown vessel grow larger on the main screen. Even from a distance, it looked impressive. Up close, it looked even bigger than the early reports had suggested. "Confirm position," Vask ordered. "Confirmed, Captain," answered the navigator. "We are in range. The unknown vessel has not moved since the scout first found it. No power increase, no weapons activity, no shields detected." Vask nodded, satisfied. Everything was going exactly as he had expected. He gave the order for his fleet to spread out and surround the silent ship from multiple directions, a tactic the Dominion had used many times before to box in enemy vessels and cut off any chance of escape. The 12 warships moved into position smoothly, forming a wide circle around the dark vessel, weapons ready, but not yet firing. Senebrask watched the formation complete itself and felt a strange tightness in her chest. The ship at the center of their circle looked even stranger this close. Its hull was smooth and dark, almost like polished stone, with long lines running across it that did not look like any kind of decoration she recognized. They looked more like writing, though no language she knew matched the shapes. "Captain, sensors are picking up something," the science officer called out suddenly. "A very faint power reading. It just appeared a moment ago." Vask leaned forward. "Define faint." "It's small, Captain, barely above the background noise. But it wasn't there a second ago." For the first time since leaving the capital world, Vask felt a flicker of doubt. He pushed it down quickly. A small power increase meant nothing. Old systems waking up after a long sleep would naturally use a small amount of energy first. It was not a sign of danger. It was simply a sign that the ship was, in fact, not completely dead. Open a communication channel, Vask ordered. All known frequencies, all known languages. Let us see if anyone is home. The communications officer worked quickly, sending out greetings in every language the Dominion had ever recorded, along with simple mathematical patterns that any intelligent species would likely understand. The bridge waited in silence as the message went out across the empty space between the fleet and the strange vessel. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly, every screen on every ship in the fleet flickered at the exact same instant. A single message appeared, written in the Dominion's own language, perfectly translated, with no sign of difficulty or delay. Leave this system. This is your only warning. The bridge of the Dominion's pride went completely silent. Vask stared at the words on his screen, his confidence wavering for just a moment. The message was short, calm, and direct. It did not sound desperate. It did not sound like a trick used by a dying, broken ship trying to scare away intruders. It sounded like a simple statement of fact, the kind one might give before doing something they had done many times before. How? Vask said slowly. Did it translate our language so quickly? We have never made contact with this species before. There is no record of communication between us and anyone matching this ship's design. No one on the bridge had an answer. Senna Brask broke the silence, her voice steady but careful. Captain, I believe we should consider withdrawing. At least until we understand more about withdrawing? Vask turned to her, his earlier doubt replaced quickly by anger and pride. We have 12 warships surrounding a single vessel that has shown no weapons, no shields, and barely any power. It sends us a single message. And you want to run? Do you understand how that would look to the Council? Do you understand what they would say about a fleet that fled from one ship without firing a single shot? I understand the risk of pride more than the risk of caution, Captain, Senna replied quietly. Vask ignored her. He turned back to the main screen, where the dark ship sat at the center of the fleet's circle, silent once more, as if the warning had already been given and there was nothing more to say. Send a response, Vask ordered the communications officer. Tell them this system and this vessel now belong to the Vorith Dominion. Tell them to power down completely and prepare to be boarded, or face destruction. The message was sent. The reply came almost instantly, the same calm words appearing once more on every screen. This is your only warning. Vask's jaw tightened. He looked around the bridge at his crew, many of whom had grown quiet, their earlier excitement replaced by a creeping sense of unease. He needed to act before that unease spread any further and turned into outright fear. Enough words, he said, standing taller. All ships, prepare weapons. We move to secure the vessel by force. Target its primary hull. Fire on my command. Across the fleet, 12 warships began charging their main weapons. The soft hum of powering systems filling each bridge with a low vibration. Crews who had trained for years for moments exactly like this one moved through familiar steps, checking targeting systems, confirming firing solutions, watching their displays for any sign of resistance from the silent vessel in the center of their formation. On the bridge of the Dominion's Pride, Senna Brask watched the dark ship one final time before the order to fire was given. It had not moved. It had not raised shields. It had not powered any weapons that their sensors could detect. It simply sat there, waiting, exactly as it had been waiting since before Doran Vale had ever found it. She thought of the old stories her grandmother used to tell her as a child. Stories about a war so terrible that entire fleets vanished in moments. About a species that fought not with anger, but with something colder and far more frightening. A kind of quiet certainty that left no room for mercy or hesitation. She had always believed those stories were exaggerated, passed down and changed over many generations, until they became legend instead of history. Now, looking at the still, silent ship on the screen, she was no longer so sure. Captain, she said one last time, please reconsider. See? Vask did not look at her. Fire. 12 warships released their weapons at the exact same moment. Streams of bright energy crossing the dark space toward the single silent vessel at the center of their formation. The light from the attack lit up the entire system for a brief instant, bright enough to be seen from much farther away, than anyone watching could have known. For one heartbeat, everything seemed normal. The weapon's fire raced toward its target exactly as it always had, in every battle the Dominion had ever fought and won. Then something happened that none of them had ever seen before. The bright streams of energy, which should have struck the dark ship's hull within seconds, simply stopped. They did not explode against shields. They did not bend around some kind of barrier. They simply vanished, as if they had never existed at all, swallowed by something none of the watching crews could explain or even properly see. On the bridge of the Dominion's Pride, the weapons officer stared at his display in confusion. "Captain, our shots, they're gone. There's no impact reading, no deflection, no absorption signature. They simply disappeared." Vask's confidence finally cracked completely. "Fire again. All weapons, continuous fire." The fleet obeyed, and again the bright lines of energy crossed the dark space toward the silent ship, and again, every single shot vanished before it could reach its target, swallowed by something invisible and impossible to understand. On every bridge across the fleet, crews who moments before had been calm and confident now stared at their screens in growing horror, watching weapon after weapon disappear into nothing, watching the dark ship sit completely unharmed and completely still, as if 12 warships firing everything they had meant absolutely nothing to it at all. Senna Brask felt her hearts pounding hard in her chest. She had seen many battles in her career, had watched enemy fleets break and flee under the Dominion's firepower more times than she could count. She had never, not once, seen anything like this. There was no sound of victory on the bridge now. There was only silence, broken occasionally by the soft, useless hum of weapons firing into emptiness. "Captain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think we need to retreat. Now." Vask stood frozen, staring at the main screen, watching his fleet's full firepower disappear into nothing, again and again. For the first time since he had taken command of this mission, he had no idea what to do next. The confident plans he had made on the journey here, the careful tactics he had drawn on the holographic map, none of it had prepared him for an enemy that simply made every attack vanish without effort, without even bothering to fight back. On the dark, silent ship at the center of the Dominion circle, nothing changed. No new lights appeared. No new sounds came from it. It remained exactly as it had been since the very beginning, calm and quiet, as if it were simply waiting for the Dominion's fleet to finish, wasting its time before something else happened. And somewhere deep inside that great dark hull, something was finally beginning to wake up. On the bridge of the Dominion's Pride, Captain Vaskidren stared at his screen, watching weapon after weapon vanish into nothing. His confidence, the same confidence that had carried him through every battle of his career, was gone completely. In its place was something he had not felt in a very long time: fear. "Captain, orders?" the weapons officer asked, his voice shaking slightly. Vask opened his mouth to speak, but before he could give any command, the dark ship at the center of the fleet's formation finally moved. It did not move the way ships normally moved, with engines flaring and hulls turning slowly through space. It simply was somewhere else. One moment, it sat motionless at the center of the circle. The next moment, every sensor across the fleet showed it had shifted position slightly, as if it had simply chosen a new place to exist without bothering to travel the distance in between. "Impossible," the navigator whispered. "There's no engine signature. No movement was detected. It just changed position." Before anyone could respond to that impossible reading, 3 of the Dominion's warships near the edge of the formation simply went dark. It happened without warning, without sound, without any visible weapon being fired from the strange vessel. 1 second, the 3 ships were there on the main screen, lights blinking, crews working, weapons firing uselessly into the void. The next second, they were gone, their power signatures vanishing from every sensor at the exact same instant, as if someone had simply erased them from the universe. "Report," Vask shouted, gripping the edge of his command chair. "What happened to the steadfast wing, the iron tide, and the bright arrow? Report immediately." No answer came. There was nothing left to report from. The 3 warships, each one carrying hundreds of crew members, simply did not exist anymore. On the bridge, panic finally broke through the disciplined silence that had held the crew together until that moment. Officers who had trained for years to remain calm under fire now found themselves staring at empty space where 3 proud warships had been only seconds before. Struggling to understand how such a thing was even possible, Senebrask forced herself to stay focused, despite the fear rising in her chest. "Captain, we need to retreat. Whatever that thing is doing, we cannot fight it. We need to leave now, while we still can." Vask did not answer immediately. He was still staring at the empty space on the screen where 3 ships had been only moments before, his mind struggling to accept what his eyes had clearly shown him. Before he could give the order to retreat, 2 more warships vanished from the formation, their lights, their weapons, their crews, all gone in the same impossible instant as the others. This time, a few crew members on nearby ships managed to catch a glimpse of what happened on their sensors. It was not an explosion. There was no fire, no debris, no wreckage left behind at all. The ships were simply removed from existence, as cleanly and quietly as wiping a mark off a clean surface. "All ships, retreat," Vask finally shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Full reverse. Emergency jump preparation. Now!" The remaining 7 warships of the Dominion's fleet began turning away from the dark vessel, engines flaring desperately as crews fought to bring their ships to maximum speed in the wrong direction. It was too little, too late. The strange ship at the center of the system had already proven it did not need to chase anything down. It had already shown that distance meant nothing to it. One by one, the retreating warships began to vanish as well, their crews screaming warnings into useless communication channels as their power readings dropped to 0 in less than a second each time. There was no pattern to which ship went next, no order that anyone on the bridge of the Dominion's Pride could understand. It simply happened, again and again, faster than anyone could process, until only a handful of ships remained. Senebrask watched the main screen with wide eyes, counting silently as ship after ship disappeared from the formation. 12 ships had come to this system with confidence and pride. Now there were only 3 left, including the flagship itself, and the gap between them and safety seemed to grow longer with every passing second. "Captain, jump drive is almost ready," the helm officer called out, sweat running down his face. 30 seconds until we can escape." "Doan." 30 seconds felt like an eternity. Vask stood frozen at his command chair, watching the dark ship on the screen, which had still not fired a single visible weapon, had still not shown a single flash of light or sound, and yet had already destroyed 9 of his 12 warships in less time than it took to give a single order. 20 seconds, the helm officer called out. Another ship vanished. Now there were only 2. 10 seconds. Vask closed his eyes for a brief moment, praying to whatever gods his people still believed in that his flagship would survive long enough to escape. When he opened his eyes again, the dark vessel on the main screen had still not moved from its new position, still sitting calm and silent, as if none of this required any real effort on its part at all. 5 seconds. 4. 3. The Dominion's Pride lurched forward as its jump drive finally activated, tearing a hole through normal space and pulling the ship and its remaining crew away from the nameless star system in a burst of light. Behind them, the very last surviving warship of the original 12 attempted the same maneuver, only a moment too late. Its power signature blinked out completely just as the Dominion's Pride vanished into the safety of hyperspace, leaving Vask Idrain alone with the knowledge that he was the only captain who had survived this disaster. The journey back to the capital world felt longer than the journey out had been. Vask sat in his quarters for most of the trip, unable to sleep, unable to eat, replaying the destruction of his fleet over and over in his mind. He had lost 11 warships and thousands of crew members in less time than most battles took just to begin. He had no explanation for what had happened. He had no real understanding of how a single ship, one that had never fired a single visible weapon that anyone could identify, had managed to erase an entire fleet from existence in mere moments. Senebrask spent much of the journey reviewing whatever sensor data had survived the disaster, hoping to find some clue, some pattern, anything that might explain what they had witnessed. The data was frustratingly thin. There were no clear images of weapons fire. There were no clear readings of energy discharge matching the disappearance of each ship. It was as if the very act of destruction had been designed to leave behind as little evidence as possible, almost as though whoever or whatever controlled that ship simply did not care about being understood by those it destroyed. When the Dominion's pride finally returned to the capital world, the news of what had happened spread through the Empire faster than anyone could control. Within hours, every senior officer, every council member, and eventually every citizen who paid attention to such things knew that a fleet of 12 warships had been sent to investigate a single unknown vessel, and only one ship, carrying only a fraction of its original crew, had returned. Fleet Admiral Korath Des was the first to meet Vask when he stepped off his ship, his face pale and his uniform still slightly disheveled from the long, sleepless journey home. "Tell me everything," Korath said quietly, his voice carrying none of the anger one might expect after such a disaster. Instead, there was only a deep and heavy concern. Vask told him everything, from the strange warning message that had appeared on every screen, to the weapons fire that simply vanished into nothing, to the impossible moment when the ship seemed to change position without ever truly moving, to the slow, horrifying disappearance of ship after ship until only his own remained. He told it all in a flat, exhausted voice, as if speaking the words out loud somehow made the memory feel slightly less real, even though he knew it would never truly leave him. When Vask finished speaking, Korath stood silently for a long moment, looking out toward the sky beyond the landing platform, where the stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening evening. "You followed the protocols you were trained to follow," Korath said finally. "You acted with the confidence the Dominion has always rewarded. None of that was wrong by the standards we have always lived by. But I fear, Captain Vask, that we have just learned something about this galaxy that we should have learned a very long time ago." "What is that, Admiral?" Vask asked quietly. Korath turned to look at him, his expression heavier than Vask had ever seen it before. "That there are forces in this universe far older and far stronger than us. Forces that we assumed had vanished simply because we stopped seeing them. And now, it seems, they have decided to remind us that they never truly left at all. Behind them, in the quiet dark of the outer veil, the great dark warship remained exactly where it had always been, calm and silent, surrounded now by nothing but empty space and the faint, fading traces of a battle that had ended almost as quickly as it had begun. The emergency council meeting was called within hours of Captain Vask's return. Every senior leader of the Vorth Dominion gathered in the tall building on the capital world, filling the room with a tension that had not been felt there in many years. Councillor Yenrathal sat at the head of the long table, her face calm on the surface, though her hands were folded a little too tightly in her lap. Fleet Admiral Korath Des stood before the council, presenting everything Vask had told him, along with the thin sensor data that had survived the disaster. The room was silent as he spoke, broken only by the soft sound of a few councillors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "To summarize," Korath said, finishing his report, "we sent 12 warships to investigate a single unknown vessel, believed to be either a relic or a threat of unknown origin. We lost 11 of those ships, along with most of their crews, in less time than it takes to properly prepare for battle. The enemy vessel showed no visible weapons fire that our sensors could identify. It did not pursue our flagship when it retreated. It simply allowed the survivor to leave. It let us go," one of the younger counselors said, his voice tight with disbelief. "After destroying 11 of our ships, it simply allowed the last one to escape. Why would it do that?" "I do not know," Korath admitted. "But I believe it is important. A force capable of destroying an entire fleet that quickly could likely have destroyed the final ship as well, if it wished to. The fact that it did not suggests its actions were not driven by anger or by a desire for total destruction. It suggests restraint, control." Councillor Yenra leaned forward slightly. "Restraint from an enemy that just killed thousands of our people is not a comfort." "Admiral, I did not mean it as comfort, Councillor," Korath replied. "I meant it as information. An enemy that fights with pure rage is dangerous, but predictable. An enemy that fights with calm control, choosing exactly how much damage to cause and when to stop, is far more dangerous, because it means they were never out of control of the situation at any point. From the very beginning, every step of that battle happened exactly as they intended it to happen." The room fell silent again, the weight of that idea settling over everyone present. Researcher Ketavoran, the old scholar who had studied the ancient texts about the Ember War, was invited to speak next. He stood slowly, his joints aching from years of leaning over old records, and addressed the council with the same careful tone he always used when sharing difficult truths. I wish to remind this council of something I shared weeks ago, before the fleet was sent, he said. The old texts describing the Ember War spoke of a species that fought unlike any other power of that ancient time. They did not describe long, grinding battles. They described conflicts that ended almost as soon as they began, with entire enemy fleets destroyed before anyone fully understood what was happening. At the time, I believed these descriptions might have been exaggerated by frightened survivors. After hearing Captain Vask's report, I no longer believe they were exaggerated at all. I believe they were simply honest. Are you saying this ship belongs to the same species from those old wars? Counselor Yenra asked. The humans? I cannot say for certain, Ket admitted. But the pattern matches too closely to ignore. A species that vanished from the historical record after a terrible war, leaving behind only fear and silence. A single ship appearing now, after centuries of nothing, showing the exact same impossible fighting style described in texts written long before any of us were born. I believe, Counselor, that we must at least consider the possibility seriously, rather than dismissing it as legend any longer. The council debated for hours after that, voices rising and falling as different leaders argued for different paths forward. Some wanted to gather every warship the Dominion possessed and launch a massive counterattack, believing that overwhelming numbers might succeed where a smaller fleet had failed. Others wanted to retreat entirely from that section of space, sealing off the border and hoping that whatever was out there would simply remain where it was, undisturbed. It was Admiral Korath who finally offered a different idea, one that quieted the room more effectively than any argument about fleets or borders had managed to do. Before we decide whether to fight or flee, he said, I believe we should try to understand. Sending a war fleet against an enemy we do not understand has already cost us greatly. I propose we send a much smaller mission, not a fleet of warships, but a single diplomatic vessel, carrying representatives who wish only to speak, to learn, and if possible, to avoid further conflict. If this species is truly the humans from the old legends, then perhaps understanding them is more valuable right now than fighting them. And if they destroy our diplomats the same way they destroyed our fleet? Someone asked from the back of the room. Then we will have lost far fewer lives than we already have, Korath answered honestly. And we will have learned something important about their intentions either way. Counselor Yenra considered this carefully before finally speaking again. There is another piece of information I believe this council needs to hear before we decide anything further. She nodded to a technician standing quietly near the door, who stepped forward holding a small data device. Our scientists were able to recover a fragment of data from the wreckage debris field, something left behind from one of the destroyed warships before it vanished completely. It is not much, but it tells us something important. The technician played the recovered data on the room's main screen. It was only a few seconds long, a partial sensor reading captured in the final moment, before one of the Dominion's warships had been destroyed. Buried within the noise of the reading was a faint signal, a kind of background transmission that had not been part of any attack at all. When the Dominion scientists had cleaned up the signal as much as they could, they found it contained numbers, coordinates, and a simple phrase repeated several times in a language none of them had ever encountered before, though a basic translation device had eventually managed to make sense of it. This position is held. In all others, return home. The room went quiet as everyone considered the meaning of those simple words. It was not a weapon being fired at us, Ketavorin said slowly, almost to himself. It was a broadcast, a standing message, meant to be repeated constantly, whether we were there to hear it or not. A border marker, Korath said, understanding dawning slowly on his face. This was never meant to be a hidden relic waiting to be discovered. It was meant to be found. It was meant to warn anyone who came near that this territory, whatever lies beyond it, belongs to someone, and that someone expects to be left alone. Then why did our scout not detect any kind of presence before approaching? Someone asked. Why did it not send this message the moment Pilot Vale's ship arrived? Perhaps it did not consider a single scout ship worth warning, Korath suggested. Perhaps the message only triggers when a true threat approaches. 12 warships, after all. would certainly qualify as a threat, by any reasonable measure. 1. The implications of this idea spread slowly through the room, each counselor working through the same uncomfortable thought in their own way. If this single ship was simply a border marker, a single sentinel meant to hold a position and warn away intruders, then what kind of power lay behind it? What kind of civilization built ships strong enough to destroy 11 warships in moments, and then placed such ships quietly along the edges of their territory, simply waiting, simply watching, with no need to announce their presence to the wider galaxy at all? Counselor Yenra finally rose from her seat, drawing every eye in the room toward her. "We will follow Admiral Korath's suggestion," she said. "We will send a single diplomatic vessel, unarmed, carrying a message of peace and a desire to understand. We will not send another fleet. We have learned, at great cost, that fleets accomplish nothing here except loss. And if the diplomats are destroyed as well?" the same nervous counselor asked again. "Then this council will know, beyond any doubt, exactly what kind of neighbor we have found at our border," Yenra replied. "And we will plan accordingly, with far greater caution than we showed before." The decision was made. Within days, a small unarmed vessel was prepared, carrying a handful of brave volunteers, willing to travel toward the very system where 11 warships had been destroyed only a short time before. Among them was researcher Ket Avorin himself, who had insisted on joining the mission, believing that someone who understood the old legends should be present if they were about to meet the legend itself, face to face. As the diplomatic ship prepared to depart, Admiral Korath stood once more on the launch platform, watching the small vessel rise slowly into the sky. He thought of Captain Vask's pale, exhausted face, as he had described the disappearance of his fleet. He thought of the calm, simple words that had appeared on every screen before the battle even began. He thought of the strange mercy shown to the final surviving ship, allowed to flee while 10 others around it had been erased without a trace. He did not know what waited for the diplomats at the edge of the outer veil. He did not know if they would return with answers, with peace, or with nothing at all. But he knew, deep within himself, that the quiet, careful, dangerous calm shown by that single dark ship was not the behavior of a dying relic, nor the random violence of an angry monster. It was the behavior of something that had been waiting a very long time, patient and certain, for exactly this moment to arrive. Far beyond the edge of the outer veil, in a part of space the Vorith Dominion had never mapped, there existed something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to imagine. It was not a single world, nor even a single system, but a wide stretch of stars quietly filled with light, with ships, and with people who called themselves simply the United Worlds. 300 years earlier, the species known to old legends as humans had nearly been destroyed. The Ember War, fought against several ancient empires that no longer existed, had cost them almost everything. Entire homeworlds had been lost. Billions of lives had ended. By the time the war finally stopped, there were so few humans left that many of the surviving empires of that era simply assumed they had been wiped out completely, their species erased from the galaxy along with the empires that had fought them. The truth was far quieter than that assumption. The surviving humans had retreated, not in defeat, but in careful, deliberate silence. They had pulled back behind a hidden border, rebuilt what they could, and chosen, very firmly, to disappear from the wider galaxy's notice until they were strong enough to never be threatened in such a way again. For 300 years, they had grown in secret, building new worlds, training new generations, and constructing ships unlike anything the rest of the galaxy had ever seen, all while remaining almost completely unseen by the empires that had once fought against them. The watchman ships, as the humans called them, were placed at quiet intervals along the edges of their territory, simple sentinels meant to guard the border without drawing attention. Most of the time, they did nothing at all, simply watching, simply waiting, exactly as they had been built to do. Only rarely did one of them ever need to act. Aboard the ship that the Vorith Dominion's fleet had encountered, a single human officer named Warden Ilara Voss sat quietly in a small control room deep within the vessel, reviewing the events of the recent battle with calm, careful attention. The ship itself, named simply Patience, did not require a large crew to operate. Its systems were mostly automated, guided by an intelligence built specifically to protect the border without unnecessary cruelty. And Alara's role was less that of a commander shouting orders, and more that of a quiet guardian, present to make important decisions only when the ship's own judgment required a human voice to confirm them. She had watched the entire battle unfold from her small control room, watching 12 warships approach, watching the warning message sent and ignored, watching the attack begin despite every chance given to avoid it. She had given the final order herself, the order that allowed patients to respond with exactly the amount of force necessary, no more and no less. 11 ships destroyed, 1 ship allowed to flee, carrying the truth of what had happened back to whoever had sent them. Why let the last one go? A younger officer back home had asked her once, during a similar incident years before, when a different fleet from a different power had tested the same border in a different part of space. Because fear without understanding only leads to more fear, Alara had answered then, and she still believed it now. If we destroy everyone who challenges us completely, all anyone will ever know about us is that we are dangerous. If we destroy only what we must, and allow the truth to be carried home, perhaps somebody, somewhere, will learn instead of simply being afraid. The diplomatic ship from the Vorith Dominion arrived at the edge of the system 12 days after departing the capital world. It approached slowly, broadcasting clear signals of peace, carrying no weapons, no shields raised, nothing that could be mistaken for another attack. Aboard the ship, researcher Ket Everin stood at the front viewport, watching the same dark vessel that had destroyed 11 warships come slowly into view, his heart's pounding with both fear and a strange, deep curiosity he had carried with him his entire scholarly life. This time, the message that appeared on their screens was different from before. Your intentions are understood. You may approach. The Dominion's diplomatic ship moved closer, slowly, carefully, until finally a connection was established between the two vessels, allowing direct communication for the first time. On the small screen before them, Ket Averin and the other diplomats finally saw the face of someone from the species that had haunted old legends for centuries. Warden Alara Voss appeared calm, even tired, her expression carrying none of the cold cruelty the diplomats had half expected to see. She simply looked like someone who had done a difficult job and was now ready to talk. "My name is Alara Voss," she said, her translated words appearing clearly on their screens. "I am sorry for the loss of your people. It was not something I wanted to happen." The simple honesty of those words caught the diplomats by surprise. They had prepared themselves for many possibilities: arrogance, anger, perhaps even silence. They had not prepared for a quiet apology. "You destroyed 11 of our warships," Ket said carefully, choosing his words with the caution of a man who had spent his entire life trying to avoid misunderstandings between strangers. "Yet you say you did not want it to happen." "I did not," Alara replied simply. "Your fleet was warned twice. The choice to attack was made by your people, not by us. But the response, the manner and the limits of that response, those were choices made by us. We could have destroyed your entire fleet completely. We chose not to. We could have pursued the ship that fled. We chose not to do that either. Every action taken that day was a choice, made carefully, not an act of uncontrolled violence. Why show such restraint toward an enemy that attacked you first?" another diplomat asked. Alara considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because we remember what it feels like to be the ones who are afraid, who are desperate, who believe that any threat must be met with everything we have, simply because we do not yet understand the cost of doing so. My people learned that lesson long ago, at a price I would not wish on anyone. We try now to offer others the chance to learn it more gently, if they are willing to listen." Ketavoran felt a chill run through him as the pieces of old legend and new truth finally settled together in his mind. "Then it is true. You are the species the old records call humans, the ones from the Ember War." "We are," Alara confirmed. "Though we have changed greatly since that time. We do not seek conflict with your people, or with anyone else who respects the borders we have marked. But we will defend what is ours, exactly as we did here, without hesitation and without cruelty, for as long as that defense remains necessary." The conversation continued for many hours after that, as the diplomats from the Dominion asked careful questions about the history of the Ember War, about the centuries the humans had spent quietly rebuilding, about the united worlds that now existed far beyond the borders most of the galaxy had ever known about. Alara answered honestly, though carefully, revealing only what she believed was wise to share with people her own civilization was still learning to trust. When the diplomats finally returned to the capital world many days later, carrying with them a full record of everything they had learned, the council gathered once more to hear their report. This time, there was no panic in the room, only a quiet, heavy sense of having learned something important about the true shape of the galaxy they lived in. They are not interested in conquest, Ketavoran told the council, summarizing weeks of careful conversation into a few simple sentences. They are interested in being left alone, and in being respected as a power that deserves caution, not as an enemy that must be destroyed before it grows stronger. I believe, if we approach them with honesty rather than pride, peace between our peoples is possible. Counselor Yenra listened carefully, weighing the weight of everything she had heard against the painful loss of 11 warships and thousands of lives. In the end, she made the only choice that seemed wise to her. Then we will approach them with honesty, she said. We will respect the border they have marked, and we will work, slowly and carefully, to build something better than fear between our two peoples. Far away, aboard the quiet ship called Patience, Warden Elara Voss received word of the council's decision with a calm sense of relief. She had hoped, as she always did after such encounters, that this time the lesson would be learned without further loss of life on either side. Sitting alone in her small control room, surrounded by the soft hum of a ship built to guard rather than to conquer, she allowed herself a small, tired smile. Behind her, far beyond the edge of the outer veil, the wide and quiet worlds of humanity continued exactly as they always had, growing slowly, patiently, preparing for a future they intended to meet not with fear, but with quiet, unshakable strength. The galaxy had spent 300 years, believing them gone. Now one ship, one warning, and one quiet conversation had reminded everyone watching that some things, once thought lost to history, are simply waiting for the right moment to be remembered. And far across the stars, in 1,000 quiet systems no enemy fleet had ever dared to approach, humanity continued its long, patient watch, ready for whatever the galaxy decided to bring to its door next.